Hi, I'm Paul Seal from codeshare.co.uk. Welcome to the sixth episode in this series where I'll show you how to build a website with Umbraco V8. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the Umbraco Grid. So the grid is what we're using for creating the content on the page, row by row. For anyone following along, if you want to follow along, you can get the source code from github.com/prjseal/Umbraco V8 tutorial. I don't have the database in here, I don't think, but you can at least get the code. So if you wanted to just see what I did in a view, if you didn't follow it along on the video screen, you could go in and you could go into this and copy it and paste it into your solution at worst. And also, if you go back to here and you go to releases, at the end of every episode, I create a file to download. So you can download the zip file, and in that zip file you will have all of the contents of this for the end of each episode. Anyway, so let's get back onto it then. So we're going to talk about the Umbraco Grid today. So if I go into Umbraco and I go to one of the content items, I'm just going to trace it through for you so you can understand it again, because we added it 2 episodes ago, I think. So this is the Umbraco Grid, and I've put some content into it, but at the moment it doesn't render out that content. If we go to the page, go to About, it does render out different content. This is hard-coded into the template, so it looks like it was rendering it out, but it isn't. So if we have a look at this then, so let's go to the document type, and we'll see that we have a content grid type called main content. And that is on our content controls. It's on our content controls composition. So on here, we're using the content grid data type. So if we track that back to data types, and we go into here, content grid, we can see that we have a grid layout, which is using a 1-column layout. You can use more than 1 column. I've never used it on any of the sites that I've done. I always delete the second one. So I always just use a 1-column layout, and then within that, you will then have rows, and we're working on a width of 12 columns on a full width. So with Bootstrap, it's usual to have it as a 12-column system. So on the half and half, we'd have the left one would be 6 and the right one would be 6. I've got it ticked here to allow all editors, so that means that any of the grid editors that are available can be used in each of these, but you can restrict it down. So if I wanted to on this one here, I could just say only rich text in this. And also with the naming of these full, half and thirds, you might want to do a row called product info or something like that, and then only allow certain editors to be able to be used in that row. So that's what you can do for that. So the next thing what I want to do is just go into actually show you how you get it to render on the page. So if we go into Visual Studio and we go to the page, let's say content, and at the moment we've got it here all hard coded in, but what we would like to do is have instead of it being hard coded in, we want it to be rendered from the contents of the grid. So if you just copy this HTML here, and then you go into Umbraco and go into opening a new tab, content, and then you go into content and you go to About, and then in here yours will be blank. If you do view source code and Control-A and then V, paste in that HTML and submit. That should give it you like this, as it was before I started. Save and publish. Now what we want to do is be able to render that on the template. So I'm just going to delete this, and I'm just going to use this. So it's at HTML dot get grid HTML, and then I'll say use the model, and then I'll tell it what property alias we want to use. So the property alias is content grid, and if we go back to this, we can see in the document type, go to settings, go to content controls. It's actually the property alias is main content, so I'll just change that to be main content. And so I'll just press save. So if you put that on yours and you put that content in there, or any content, and then press save, then what should happen when you go to the front of the site and you go on, I've done this, put the content in on the about page, we shouldn't see much of a difference because actually what I pasted in is exactly the same as this. So what I'll do, just to test that it works, is I'll go back into content and I'll just put testing at the top. And then we'll refresh the page and we've got testing there, so that's good. And then as you can see, we've already added these like half and half, but one good thing about this is you can also drag these around into the other areas. So if I was to do that, and then maybe if I added a different one in here, I could add just some more rich text here and then save and publish. If we refresh the page, now we'll have a big image, then half being that and then half being this. Now you'll notice that these are not seeming to work properly, and we'll sort that out later on because the images with Bootstrap, you want to apply a class called image-fluid with Bootstrap 4. In Bootstrap 3 it was image-responsive, I think. So we'll address that issue and we'll fix that later on. But what I wanted to do, I'm just going to delete this for now, just so we don't have this muddying the water. So I'll just delete that. And you can delete these individual items or the whole row if you want to. So I'm going to save and publish again and just refresh the page. So now it's just a cleaner thing. So how does the Umbraco grid work? Well, if we go into Visual Studio and we have a look in Solution Explorer and we go down to Views and then open out Partials and then Grid. And what we have is this here. We've got Bootstrap 3 and then Bootstrap 3 Fluid. So what we want to, by default, it uses Bootstrap 3. If we wanted to, we could see the effect of using Bootstrap 3 Fluid, but what I think we'll do, actually let's try it. I've not done this before, but the way you do it, if you want to use a different one, is you can just do a comma and then ask you what the framework alias is. So we're going to say Bootstrap 3-fluid and then save that. And then if I put those images back in, let's just see if it does do anything with that. I'll be interested to find out. Pick the cat again. There's two cats. Save and publish and then refresh that. Right, so now what I did there was I'm still getting from the model the main content and I'm getting the grid HTML for it, but I'm telling it to use a different framework. Let's refresh that. So it's getting it from a different framework and it's still got massive images. That's okay, we can sort that later. So I was going to show you how it works then. So if we look at this, this is the framework. So what we can do is we can copy this Bootstrap 3. I like to control and click and drag it up to the folder. So do into grid and let go. And then that creates a copy for me. So I'll just call this one clean. So we're going to create our own one. And before we change it or do anything with it, we're just going to on the content template, we're just going to change this to say use the clean framework. And then we'll refresh the page. And we should see no difference. And it has actually rendered it out on the page for us. So it's fine, it's worked. So then what I want to do is show you how you can learn about how it's working and see what data it's got and things like that. So first things first, we've got this one column and else. So if it's one column, then do this. Otherwise, do this. Now, if you remember in the data type, I said that I only ever start with I use a one column. So what I like to do when I create a custom one of these is I delete this if condition. Oh, I'll leave that one there. Yeah. let me start again. So I delete the if and the else. So I always want to just for each around this and do this top part. So that's what I do first of all. I delete this where it defines a variable to say is it one column or not, because I don't need that. In this render row, it was rendering the row based on whether it's one column or not, so I can delete that where it passes in single column, and I can delete the variable in that helper render row, because it will always be single column. And again, by doing that, it lights up where this was being used, so I can delete that line there, and I can delete this line here. So now it doesn't care about whether it's single column or not, and it's just going to render the row in this way. And in Visual Studio, you can do Control KD, and that tidies up your formats your view for you. So I've done that, and now so I've got my render row, and it doesn't care about single or not anymore. But what a good thing to do, what I find to help understand the grid is just if you do this bit here inside the for each where it's got var section in model.sections, if you just do a pre tag and then just do at section, but because it's called section, it can be confusing with the names because that's a reserved name. So if you just wrap the brackets around the word section, then it knows it's using it as the variable section, not using it as the keyword section. And then save that, and then let's go back to the front page, and then we'll refresh it, and we'll see at the top, we'll see it will output some JSON that it's using. So when the grid gets stored in the database, it's stored as JSON, and we can grab this JSON. So what we can do is we can copy this JSON, and we can search for JSON parser online. And I like to use this one, JSON.parser.online.fr, and paste that in here. And this will actually let you toggle these. So if we just close this to right, so if we close the rows, we can see that there is a grid, and it's set with a value of 12. So it's working on the 12 column layout. There are rows, and of which there are 2 in the array. And in the first row, we've got a name called full. So this corresponds with what we have up here, full. And then we've got some areas in this. So how many areas are there? There's just the one area. So in this, it's got a grid of 12 columns, and it's got a control in there, and the control has a value, and it has an editor, and the editor name is rich text editor, which we know we used, and the value in here is the HTML that we saved into it. And if we go to the next row, we can see that this is called half, and there are 2 areas in there, and in each area, this one's a 6 column area, and it has a control with a value which is a UDI, which is an image. So we've got the way Umbraco stores it. So that's its identifier in Umbraco, and that's its path. And that's using the editor of an image. And if we close that, we've got another one, should be the same as well. And those editors are in here. So we've got RTE and media. So they correspond to these. So if you were having to unpick it or create your own and things like that, it's good to understand how it all gets saved and how it's mapped and works together. So just thought I'd show you that little trick there. If you wanted to see the contents of the grid to try and understand it, you can do that in a pre-tag. And the reason I like the pre-tag is because it's basically a code block that it outputs to the screen for you that you can then just copy and paste. So the other thing with this then, so the beauty of using Umbraco is that you get to output the HTML that you want to. So it doesn't have any opinions on how you should build your pages or anything like that. Umbraco doesn't care. And that's what I like about it. So if I get a static HTML build from somewhere, I can build that exactly as it's intended. And with this, one of the things that I needed to do here is if we go into the content template, so if I just click on here and go to content, if we see we've got this here, so this container, row, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that is what goes around the contents of the grid. I don't want to have that on every template. I want that inside my grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this up. I use Alt and the up arrow to do that. I'm going to take this and cut it out of here. And if we just do that, let's just have a see what happens on the page. So you'll see that it uses the full width of the page and it still looks quite ugly. So if we go back into here and we go into the grid, the clean framework that we've created, what I want to do is in here, I just want to paste that in, and then I want to put that in like that. So now it will render each row inside one of these container row and what have you. So if we save that and then we refresh, we can see that it's worked. And if you don't like the width and you want to change it, you can do that here. So we could change that to maybe 10 and then 12 for this bit. And then we can refresh that, and that should just give it a bit of extra width. So we might like to use it like that. Yeah, so it's a bit of a wider template there. But it's up to you how you want to do that. I'm just going to undo that and leave it as it was. So we've got our clean framework here, but we still have an issue with the image size. So we could pick the exact size image, but when you go onto mobile, it will still need to be, ideally what you want to do is have it to be responsive to the width of the container that it's in. So if it's in a full width, it should go all the way across here. If it's in a half and half row, it should be just halfway across to about there, and then the other image in there. So one thing that I did on my starter kit was I created an HTML extension. And so we're going to do that as well. So we're going to apply this image fluid class to all images within the grid. So we need to add a class library here. So we do add new project. I'm going to call it cleanblog.core. I'm going to save it in the root of my GitHub repository. It's a class library, .NET Framework 4.72 C#, and then OK. So that's created myself a class library, and then what I can do is I can install the Umbraco libraries that I need. So if I do Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages, and then I search for Umbraco CMS, just search for that, what we'll see is there's 3. So we don't want to include the full CMS because we don't want that in a class library. What we want is just the core and the web. So with Umbraco V8, you get 2 core libraries now, not just the one. So what we want to do is we want the one that is installed is 8.14, but just see that the latest stable is 8.15. So I want to tick core, and I want to click on choose 8.14. So for the Umbraco CMS web project, I'm going to choose the 8.14, the same version as what I have in my web one. I've not upgraded yet, basically. If you leave it as 8.15, you might blow things up like I did when I tried doing this video earlier in the week. And just have a look at this, and it does actually depend on umbracocms.core 8.14. So if I just do it for web, it will also do it for core as well for me. So if I install that, just by ticking on core and choosing the right version and then clicking on install, so that will go off and it will download the packages for me, and it will add them as references into the class library package. And while we wait for that, we'll have a look at the code that I'm going to use. So the code that I'm going to use is in my clean starter kit and in source, and then in clean.core, and then extensions, and then HTML extensions. So we'll create an HTML extensions file, and in this file we've got it says it's a static method, so it's a static class with a static method, meaning that we don't have to instantiate it, we can just call it at any point, and we're just saying get the grid HTML. And as it's an extension method, it uses this HTML helper, so we'll be able to do @HTML, and we're going to define our own get grid HTML, and at the end of it we're going to say, is it got fluid images or not? Yes or true or false on that. So if it's using fluid images, then that means we want to add this where it comes out as an image. We want to say image with a class of image fluid. And if it hasn't got, if that's set to false, then we'll just get it to return how it normally does at the moment, how we've got it set up. So let's have a look to see if it's all been installed. Oh, we need to click on OK and accept the licenses. So while we wait for that, let's just have a look here. We can see all of these references coming in that Umbraco 814 uses. And we can, so it's complaining about some namespace and things like that, but that should be okay now. So I think it's all done. If we go into here, we open out core, we can delete the file because we don't need it, the class.1 file. The packages.config is there. We'll add a new folder then, and this one we'll call extensions. So we've right clicked on the project, said add, and then we'll call it extensions. And then in this I'm going to add a class called HTML extensions. So in here, if I've got any HTML helper methods that I want to add, this is where I'll add them. So I'm going to call this HTML extensions, just like the one that we saw in the file from my starter kit that I created. So what I'll do, so it's not just a you watch me type exercise, I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to copy the inside of it because we've already got the namespace. I'm just going to paste that in here. So it's picked up that it doesn't have these, but it's saying, do you want to use these? So we're going to add some using statements at the top. So one for system.web, oh, and also MVC as well. So we want to use system.web MVC. So we can get rid of these up here. And don't forget, you can look at this code because I'll be checking it into source control. So you can find this in the Umbraco V8 tutorial repository. I'll leave a link in the description. So what we can do here is we can say get grid HTML, and what I like to do on this fluid images, I'm just going to always assume that it's false. So you can set it with a default value, bool fluid images equals false. So this will basically, as I've already said, will replace anything that starts with image and a class. You don't have to do it this way. This is the way I found of solving the problem. You might find a different way to solve a problem, but it just helps with what I wanted to achieve. So then what we need to do is we need to give it a build. So build a solution. And that's succeeded. And then we want to right click and add a reference. And the reference, we want to go into projects, solution, and then tick cleanblog.core and then OK. So I've right clicked on the web project to add the reference. Just do another build now. So that means that we will be able to use this at get grid HTML and pass in the true for the fluid images. So if we go back to where we were using this on the content template, and then we can now press comma, and we can just say fluid images with a colon and then true. Now it's not lit up yet because it doesn't know what we mean, but what we can do at the top of the file, if we do a using statement, just say using cleanblog.core.extensions. And now it recognizes it, so it knows that it can use that. And the reason I've put this in for the variable is just so that it's just clearer than using just true like that. And what it's doing is how it's doing it here. It's telling, because I've got resharper, it's telling me what that variable is. But if I didn't have resharper, I could just leave it like that to say fluid images : true. Okay, so I was having an error, and usually these sort of errors, when people find them, they'll remove them, they'll delete them from the video, and you won't get to see the error. I think it's an important one to show you here. So the error I was getting was being caused by me adding the fluid images equals true. And by doing that, and also not referencing umbraco.web, what it was doing, it was getting into a loop. So where it says call this get grid HTML, it was calling itself, and it just kept constantly calling itself because it wasn't aware of the one that was in umbraco.web, because I hadn't referenced that. And also, because I've made this optional, this method also works if you just call it like this. So this exact one gets called again. So it got itself into a bit of a loop. So don't put a default of equals true on that variable. And then this is complaining, well, it doesn't know of any other usage. So then what you do is you do using umbraco.web, and then it will be aware, put a colon at the end, and then it will be aware of all the other overloads that you can use for it. So when you do that, then instead of calling itself again, it will actually go off and call the ones that are built into Umbraco. So with that done, and with a save and a rebuild, we can then go off onto the front page. So where we've got these huge images like this and going outside of the containers that they're in, because we're going to use content, if we go into here and we just put a comma true, it will know that we want to use this where we're passing in fluid images. And then we'll just stop this, refresh it again. And then go down, and there we have it. So the images now don't go outside the container that they're in. So they're responsive with it. So if we log back into here, and then we just add an image just to show you, let's do a full width image. Click on the image. So one thing this doesn't solve is the cropping of this image, but you can create your own custom editor that will render it out at a certain crop if you want to. Refresh that, and there we have it. We've got this going the full width. So yeah, as I was saying, you could, if you wanted to, create your own custom editor, or you could tell it that whenever it renders out an image, you could tell it to only ever render it out with a certain width and height as well. I think you can actually do that in the model editor, the width and the height, in the config of it. But if you wanted to, you could just do a query string here and just do width equals 800, I think. And that should limit it anyway. And if you inspect that and open that, yeah, you see the intrinsic width is 800. So that was a quick way for doing that. So if we took off on the content part, if we took off the comma true and save and then refresh, you'll see that it won't be calling off our HTML helper extension, and the size of the image won't be as massive because it's only pulling out the cropped version, which I've set at a width of 800. I'm not going to leave that in place, so I'm just going to go back into that media one, and I'm just going to undo those changes because I don't want to do that. For now, I'll just be aware of that, know that it's pulling massive images out onto the page, and I need to do something about that myself. So there we go. So it's doing it side by side and then there. And you can add things in to do styling on these as well. Maybe on an image responsive, you might want to put a margin bottom or something on that will push this down. You can do that in your CSS. So that's how we're using the grid. That's the Umbraco grid, and it hooks into your Bootstrap So the output is how you want it to be with your Bootstrap, and that's how you customize it, and how you understand how it all works. So I hope people have found that useful, and if you have and you want to say thanks, then I'd be appreciated, but it's not obliged. If you want to, you could go to codeshare.co.uk/coffee. And thanks again to those that have already bought me a coffee. I've enjoyed the caffeine hit. And also, please click on like on the video if you did like it. Leave any comments if you've got any. And subscribe to my channel if you want to look out for the next episodes coming up, where I'll take this series further with building your Umbraco V8 website. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, bye.